Welcome back. Long time no see. Have you been playing Elden Ring as well? Today we are going to be painting a trash bag from KFC, full of trash from KFC as well. Now, the inspiration from this came from real life, as you can notice the photo of my KFC trash on the floor. This photo, I took a photo of it because I thought it looked very aesthetic and thought it would be hilarious to paint some KFC trash. To do this first, I was a little bit intimidated because I'm not sure how good I am at making folds and creases yet. So I watched a tutorial that told me that there are 3 steps of painting folds and creases well. One is find where the contrast places are. So all those dark lines that I made, those were all the contrast places that I noticed where the light goes sharply from light to dark. Second of all, after that, find where are all the gradients. So all the slight gradients that go from light to dark, but not so sharply, and paint them back in. And thirdly, only after that should you look at the color, is what the tutorial said. Now I did this first, and I did that in a way that I first used a kind of a bluish grey color to try and paint all the contrasts and the gradients, so I can later on focus on the colors. As you can see, even with that, it wasn't as smooth sailing. I tried making the gradients and tried making the contrasts, but my brain kept on forcing me to add more or to redo a contrast part that I did already over and over again. So I feel like a lot of time was just lost on me trying to deepen the gradients or restore back the contrast that I lost by painting over it or by making the gradient too close to its natural color. Here's where I started using color. And now for the color, I used 3 different types of brown. One that was more yellowish and one that was more reddish. And I hope that the blue gray that I used would come through from the background, because from what I could see from the photograph, there were a lot of green undertones to the bag itself. So I started placing all the colors in, following the gradient and contrast map that I made for myself before I started applying the paint. And when I first applied the first layer, I didn't think there were enough contrasts at all. So I tried to deepen them as well, and I tried fixing the inner part of the back where I had to guesstimate what goes where, because most of it was covered by trash that I'm gonna add on later on. So I was deepening the contrasts, deepening the gradients. And now you see I took some yellow because I wanted to add the light yellow highlights that I could perceive on the photo. So those were on the very leftmost of the painting. I started adding them bit by bit and making sure that I followed the logic of the bag that I could perceive. I also added some of the yellow that was already a bit spent just on the places where I thought contrast should be and where I wanted to kind of blur out the complete monotone look of the painting part. Next we have some orange, and I mixed that orange into that yellow to add those lovely warm tones that I can see on the top right part of the bag, specifically there on the light parts. And after that, I felt like there were there was too much contrast missing. So I went in and added those back as well, using the dark brown mixed with that blue gray color I used before. So I went on deepening the color. And adding that contrast outline wherever I could see it. Next, I took some white and just wanted to add highlights here and there where I felt like, again, that there was not enough contrast, because after my first color blending, everything felt a bit monotone and I felt like I need to restore both the gradients and the contrast. You can see that I'm using a very warm brown for this part here. And I lightened the inner part of the bag that we could see. And then, again, restore some of those contrasts. And around that middle part, I could see a lot of warm colors. So I wanted to add them in as well, even though I knew most of it was going to be covered by the trash itself. Next, it was time to draw in the trash. I started with the Pepsi Max cup on the top right and the cup on the top left. Now, this was the least difficult part to paint for me, because again, there weren't as many gradients that I needed to implement very carefully into the contrasts for it to look good and light and proper. I use some of that light orange paint over the white. And then I started working on the background using my darkest dark brown to create the shadow and the texture of the rug a bit, and decided I wanted to add the table next to it, just to kind of have the bag leaning onto something for composition and for it to make sense to have that much contrast between the lightest part of the bag and the darkest part of the bag, because there was something that it was leaning against. Again, I used that, I think I used Mars Black. You can see it's a kind of a bluish black to paint I painted the most contrast in that right middle part of the painting. And then I painted the table, just an indication of it, because not much of it was needed, because since it wasn't the main focus of the painting. After that, I continued on to the background, and I wanted to add more of the yellow orange paint, light grading going from the most concentrated on the top left to less concentrated on the right, kind of blending it into the darks and the blues. I used blue to kind of go over the brown parts of the shadow that I painted, again playing into that yellow and blue contrast, and then decided I need a bit more yellow on the carpet. After that, I added a bit of red and more blue for the contrast. Next, was the KFC logo part. So I decided to just hand draw it in. It was a bit extraneous trying to guesstimate and follow my bag folds and how the letters would change accordingly. But I hope that I followed the reference photo as well as I could so that it would make sense. Here, the most difficulties I found with placing the Colonel's eyes and face, since it wasn't that clear where his eyes began and where the shadow from his nose or the merged shadows from his right part of the face ended. Continuing on, and when it looked good enough, I went back to the little trash pieces up there because I wanted to finish up that main Pepsi Max bottle and just add a bit of more contrast to the left one. Now I used the half transparency of the white I used before over the black into my advantage to add those tiny little lines over the edge of the lid. And that was it. I felt that everything was good enough. I was tired enough, and the finished piece looked lovely. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed us. Bye.